Okay, well, get going. Hello, everyone. Happy Thursday. We're very excited to be here today for a monthly data community meeting. And we're super lucky this month to have a presentation from Susan St. Vincent, who is our fearless founder of this group. We're super lucky to be getting to learn about how to use Power Query in Excel. And I've heard that this may be especially relevant to anyone who's having to do lots of transformations in Excel, particularly grant reporting folks. So if there's any grant reporters in the room, this is for you. And if not, feel free to pass those insights on to the rest of your team, and I'll turn it over to Susan.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think fear was maybe a little overstating it, but yes, very glad to be here to have the time to be back in this community. It's always home for me, so I'm glad to have the time and space for that. I did want to talk a little bit today just about the ways that we've found Power Query really useful to us in our grant reporting. It's saved us a ton of time and kind of manual effort, which is always one of the fun things that I like doing with data in tech. So I'll start off by sharing my screen and talking a little bit about a use case, a scenario that we have that we really found this super useful in. So I'm going to talk about a grant that we have. That's a county grant, and the billing for this is based on client, professional categories, whether the person who was doing the work was an attorney, was a paralegal professional, by area of law. So you can see family law here, restraining orders, immigration, benefits. Um, and this was something that was taking us a ton of time to do prior to starting to use Power Query. And I'll walk through some of the reasons why that was the case, and kind of why the tools that we might have otherwise used, such as pivot tables, etc., just weren't quite cutting it for us. Another thing that we had to do is we had to say, okay, we've got this flat rate per category per area of law, but there's an exception to that flat rate, which is that we're allowed to bill a legal assessment. And that legal assessment gets charged at a flat rate as well. So regardless of how much time it took you to do that assessment, we're getting this amount versus this hourly rate that we would otherwise be getting. And so, we were able to get quite a lot of information out of Legal Server to start doing that, right? And so, some things we were able to pull out of Legal Server include the database ID for the case, the supervisorial district, which is something that we needed to report on, the case ID, the client ID. And so we were able to pull a lot of this information out of Legal Server, but pivoting this into the kind of categories and framing that the funder wanted was taking easily 2 to 3 hours every month. And then if any data was wrong and needed to be changed, guess what we got to do again? And so that's something that I was really hoping that we were going to be able to solve. And when I realized that the tools that we had become more familiar with in Power BI were also available in Excel, it really seemed like the right fit for us. And so kind of looking at this export that we have from Legal Server here, this is time slip based data. So we've got information that we pulled from the case, information we pulled from the user record. This kind of professional type is our user information coming from Legal Server. We then have the activity code, which is coming from the time slip, some kind of static numbers that we put in there that we actually wouldn't need anymore now that we're doing this in Power Query. And we've got the transaction number, and then again, the actual amount of time that was spent is here. And so again, for those of you who use Legal Server or a comparable case management system, this is a time slip based report, but it's pulling all this additional information in. And so the goal is then to do a couple of things, right? So it's going to be to collapse that down to the client level and pivoted it out at the kind of professional category and area of law level. And so tools that you might be familiar with to do this, right? If I was to come in here and say, okay, I'm going to insert a pivot table, that's going to allow me to do some basic summaries, right? I could say, okay, we're going to get a professional type, and then we're going to take that the actual time that was spent. So let me find that time spent, and sum it up there. And maybe I can even break that out further by the area of law, legal problem. There we go. What do you call it? Category. Right, so we can start to do some of this work in Power, not in Power Query, but just in a basic kind of pivot table. But there's still pieces missing, right? So this doesn't help me filter out those legal assessments, right? To count those differently. It doesn't help me um, to kind of pivot this in the way that I need to multiply it by the amount of time that's spent. It certainly doesn't allow me to do things like, let me find that template again. Let me find a completed one actually. Um, like this right here, which is that they wanted us to put the case IDs in there on a single row if it's for a single client. And so we've got to kind of somehow get the case level information and join that up at the client level, and then get it into this report. So I'm just going to kind of walk through some of the steps that we use to do this in Power Query, and I'm hoping that some of these will be interesting and relevant for you. I will note that I'm going to be walking you through doing this from an exported CSV, but we actually have this set up to connect to the Legal Server API. So for those of you who have used Power BI and used Power Query there to connect to Legal Server, it is the exact same steps and setup to connect live to the Legal Server API. And what that allows us to do, right, is to actually make the changes and fixes that we need to make directly in Legal Server, come back here, hit refresh, and all of those are reflected. And so that is a really big time saver for us. But just again, in the interest of kind of data privacy and not putting too many factors in here that I can't control, we're going to be working from that CSV. So from here, the way that you're going to get to Power Query is coming over to data. And again, if you've done this in Power BI, maybe a little bit familiar, you've got these get data options. And so right now, I'm just going to get it from a table or range. If you click on this drop down here, you can actually just get straight into the Power Query editor, which is often something that I like to do, and I'm trying to get that over on the correct screen. And that just pulls you right into where you need to go. And guess what? It's already, this is the actual query that we had used previously. But I'm going to delete that because we're going to start from scratch. Okay, so let's get rid of that. And then we'll come back and pull the data directly from here. So I'm just going to get data from a table or range. And then it's going to say, where do you want to get that from? Oh, it's already, yeah, okay. So it's already decided, okay, I'm going to get that from this current workbook. There's only really one sheet with data, so it's correctly guessed that that's where I want to get the data from. And then it has kind of done an auto assessment of what types of data are in each of these columns. And so that happened with one click, right? I didn't have to do anything fancy. It just pulled all of that data in here for me to start to work with. So one of the first things that we needed to do again was kind of to identify which time should be billed kind of based on the duration and which time should be billed based on the fact that it's a legal assessment. And so in this case, we have the legal assessments are flagged by the activity code. And so when I see LAS, I know that that's a legal assessment. And so in Power Query, it's really easy to come in here and say, I'm gonna make myself a nice custom column here. I'm just gonna make it a conditional column actually, which is that if the activity code let's call this LAS. If that activity code is LAS, then I'm going to count that. I'm just going to put the number 1. Else nothing. We don't need to enter anything here if it's not a legal assessment. What that's going to allow us to do is then to use this to sum, right? To sum this column to get that total count of legal assessments. If you were doing this using, for example, a formula in Excel, right? That would be something like, if this, then this, else this. You can do it, but you have to do it every single time that you want to run this analysis. The nice thing about using this in Power Query is that you can hard code all of these steps kind of behind the scenes. And so your end users don't have to touch it. They don't have to remember to do all the steps. They just have to know how to load the data and then have it run through the analysis. So now I've got a count of legal assessments. That was very easy. At this point, I want to compile this down. So I want to start looking at this based on the client rather than based on the time slip. And so I'm actually going to do a quick reference of this table. So now I've got a copy of this that I can work from, and I'm going to group all of this down by client ID. Actually, before I do that, let's just pick the columns that I actually need. So let's go to, where's my columns? Choose columns. I'm going to keep let's do suit district. Let's do our contract ID or our case ID, our client ID. What else might I want in that? That actually might be all that I need. So cool. Let's do that. So let me come in here and then say, okay, we've got this nice kind of list of data, right? That is, it's still kind of per time slip, right? So we've got multiples of the same entry based on, how many time slips are entered on that case. But we've only got the information that we want. So now I'm going to join this down and kind of aggregate it to the client level. And so the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to say, I'm going to come to client ID and say group by client ID. From there, I'm going to just put info, and then I'm going to say all rows. What this is going to do is it's going to give me one row for each unique client ID. So you can see this kind of summary up here at the top. I've got 109 distinct numbers, 109 of them are unique. Great. And so now we've got kind of an individual client level data, which is what I want. And so now I want to then pull out the case numbers, right? Because at the end of the day, what we're looking for is something like this, right? So I need a row per client, but then I also need to include those individual case numbers. And so Excel doesn't like you to kind of switch between tabs when you're in Power Query. So let me come over here now and I'm going to say, okay, from this, I'm going to pull out some information. So these tables will include on that table, I can actually click on the kind of white space here and it'll give me a preview. It's going to include each of those time slip entries. It's going to include each of those case numbers and each of the soup districts. And so let me actually come back up here. And before I do that grouping based on clients, I'm going to do a grouping based on everything. So I'm going to select all of these options and I'm going to say group by all of them. And that's going to deduplicate for me. So anytime that all 3 of those are the same, it's just going to be one row. Anytime that any of those things are different, it's going to be a different row. And so that allows me to, again, kind of get rid of that duplication. And I don't even need this count column anymore. That's just the count of how many time slips kind of matched on all 3 of these fronts, which for my purposes, I don't need right now. I might need it later, but I don't need it right now. I might need it in a different context, but I don't need it for this one. So then when we come back to group, let me look at this table. Okay. So now this client only has one case and one soup district, so we've only got one row. If they had multiple cases or multiple soup districts, then you would have multiple rows in that table, and that's where we're going to get that information to actually join and put in that template. So now I can come up here and let's do let's do a custom column. I forget how I did this originally, so I'm kind of relying on some stuff I already know. But let's come in here and say I want to get what do I want to get out of there? I want to get, let's say this is the contractor IDs plural. Let's go that case number. And so out of my info column, I'm going to get the what is it? What is that column that I want to get? Is it called contractor ID? Let's figure that out before I type it so I don't mistype it. I'm back up here. That's fine. I'll promise I. Okay, contractor ID number. Okay, let me actually just copy that. So I've got a exact. I know what I'm talking about. Okay, come back down here and let's add that to custom column. And then I'm going to get from this table, this info table, I'm going to then get the contractor ID number. And I think that has to be in. I'm looking at my little cheat sheet over here on the left of how I did this before. Oh, I remember how I did this. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to say, okay, let's go ahead and bring this out. Let's aggregate these, the soup district and the contractor ID. I don't need the original column name. So now what we've done is now I have, instead of a table, I have a count of the soup districts and a count of the client IDs. Not actually super helpful, right? So a count of these is not what I want. I don't want to list that count. I want to be able to combine that in text. And so I'm going to come up here and do a little bit of, manual entry um, into the formula field here. And so I'm going to say I want to join the text. There we go. I'm going to go text combine. Actually, let me do this way I did it before. I'm trying to do a shortcut. And let me just not do that so I don't get stuck. Okay, so I'm going to add let me just put in here another step. So I've got this step. I'm going to come in here and say, let's add another step. This is referring to the step before. So it's telling Power Query what order to do things in. And so that needs to stay here kind of as is. Otherwise, it's going to tell you that it doesn't know what it's doing. And it's going to be mad at you. So I'm going to come in here and say, and then leave it where it is. We want that. And then we're going to say, we want, see, this is where I should have taken better notes. Let me show you, let me pull this up how I did it before, and then I can reverse engineer it from here. So let me pull this. Actually, let me just do this one at a time. That'll be easier. Okay, we're gonna pull out this one first. Okay, so let's go ahead and just let's not do a count, let's just do the maximum of the soup district. Okay. So now we've got kind of the information that I wanted, right? So now we figured out a way to get this the way that we wanted it to be, but we don't actually want the max, right? So we want this to be the list. There we go. We don't want that to be that. We just want this to be left soup districts, plural. Okay. Now it's going to give me a nice error. I'm gonna have to figure out how I did this. This is the fun thing about working with Power Query is that at least for me, I forget how I did things all the time, and then have to go back and figure out again. So this is again the actual one that we use. Let me come in here to the data. I'm going to go into just launch Power Query Editor. Um, that's a really helpful kind of shortcut once you already have things set up. You don't have to try and get through the get data, etc. So let me come over to client IDs where we've done this before. And so where do? We grouped everything and aha, I see what we did. Yeah, okay. I have figured out what happened. Okay. Google is your friend, people. This is how I've learned to do this in the first place. It's how I've figured out um, how I did it wrong and how to fix it. So, okay, we'll come back over here. Let's go back into our demo, launch that Power Query Editor, and come over to the right screen. Okay. Doesn't look like it liked saving my prior work. So let's do it real quick. So let's see how fast I can do this. Keep the columns. And then keep the case ID. On chapter and the soup district. Okay. Now I've got these. I'm going to do that group by again to get rid of our duplicates. Then, okay. And this is the step that I skipped in my note taking. So when we're going to do this group by client ID, instead of just adding everything to a table, we're actually going to add new columns based on the information that we want to aggregate. So this is going to be, let's do a untrack for IDs. And we're going to do, let's just do the max. And let's add another one. Let's add another aggregation. We're going to do the soup district. And we're going to do, let's do max again. Okay. So now we'll actually get columns for each of those that we want. But again, we don't actually want the max. And so this is where I'm going to come up and get my actual thing that I want, which is a comma separated list. And so I'm going to do each of these, and then we're going to do text combine, and then list. Okay. Then make sure I don't forget a parentheses. And is it not like, okay, let's actually try this without this. Okay, that worked. But we still need to have that and in there. So that's where I would need to come back in here and put that and for myself. I'm gonna actually stop kind of beating my head against the wall on this one. But I'll show you what I did in a minute. But at least we have it now. So again, like this is something that you could come back and figure out, okay, I actually want to figure out. And I don't actually want the soup district. I want the, okay, very picky with your naming. Um, So I think that hopefully the point is still clear, right? That you're getting a lot of ability to kind of aggregate things on the client ID level, on the case level. Um, you're actually able to kind of figure out what level you want to assess things and go from there. Um, so another place where in this particular reporting that we needed to work from is not just kind of on the client level, but we also needed to look at this on the kind of time slip and category level, right? And so if I come back in here and we want to look at that, um, again, right now I'm looking at things on kind of individual time slip levels, not super useful for getting it into that template. But the first thing that I'm going to want to do, let's see, for the time summary table, is I'm going to want to remove those legal assessments. We can add those back in later, but for now, I don't want to include those in my summaries. So I'm just taking out anything that was marked as a legal assessment. That's no longer in my list, right? So super easy way to kind of clean that data. Um, from there, let's go ahead and again, let's pick some columns so that we have a little bit of a cleaner thing to work with. Let's go ahead and keep the client ID. We need something to tie everything together. Let's go ahead and keep the um, about the time that was spent, the time spent. We need to keep the professional category that folks are in, professional category. Um, and okay, so now we've got kind of the data that we want to work with to get us into, again, ultimately, that kind of pivoted template that we looked at. And so from here, what I can do is I can say, okay, I actually want to sum all of the time spent by the professional category and the client ID. So again, kind of going into our friend group by, going to come in here and group by these. And then we're going to sum that time spent. So sum, much more built in, it's a lot easier to figure out. Sum that time spent. So now we've got something closer, right? It's what we were looking at, but it's sideways, right? So we want to pivot this so that we're grouping by professional category, and then the sum is showing up in the correct cells, right? And so from there, we can come over and we can say we want to pivot this column. And I forget if pivot is here or here. Maybe it's transpose. Nope, pivot column. There we go. I want to pivot that column. The values column is going to be the sum. And then, yeah, sum should be the sum of the data. So cool. We can't convert value null to type text. So we've got some nulls here. Can't have that. There's the data was not totally clean before I did. So there we go. Okay. And now we're pivoted, right? So now we have kind of the right things in columns and the right things in rows. So now we look a lot closer like the template that we need to ultimately kind of match this to, which is great. So getting closer. In the interest of time, I won't go through and kind of sort all of this and kind of put these in the right order. But it's pretty easy to do. You can just drag and drop to move things into that correct order. I can also sort it here, and let's see if that carries through. Sort ascending. And then if I pivot it, aha, it sorts for me. Look at that. This is what we like. And so now this is great, right? But now I just have the time data. I don't have the other data that I need for the template, which is based on the client. I don't have that column for the soup district, and I don't have that column for the case IDs. And this is where, again, Power Query is lovely because I can actually join those tables. And I'm going to rename them something useful before I do that. So let's say that this one is our client data, and this one is our time data. So now I want to get the client data onto the time data, right? And so I'm going to come up here and I'm going to say I want to actually merge my two queries. So I'm going to say I want to merge this one, the time data based on the client ID, with the client data also based on the client ID. And so fortunately, because both of these are pulling from the same underlying data set, we've got a nice one-to-one match, which is kind of what we want. Not in all scenarios, but in this one, that's what we want. And so now I've pulled that client data in to my time kind of base data. So now I can come over here and if I get it, there we go, that works. Now I'm going to just go ahead and expand that out and say I want to get the soup district and the contractor ID, and I want to pull those over. So now, right, again, we had a little bit of a glitch with getting the things to aggregate exactly the way we wanted to, but we were able to pull over the soup district and the contractor ID from the client data table. Did we actually end up aggregating those? We didn't, did we? No, okay. So that's why we're getting kind of multiple rows per client here. But if we had aggregated them the way we meant to, let's go ahead and just do that. Let's say in this grouping, that was a deduplication one. Let's do it again. Let's group by client ID. And then we'll do min, it's fine. There may be some scenarios where you would actually want maximum or minimum, and you wouldn't have to do this kind of workaround of kind of making it into a list, but do so for example, you might want to do like most recent case or most recent intake, things like that. It's got this built-in feature for you. It's only because I'm wanting to do something that's a little bit outside of what they kind of anticipate you would want, that, I ended up having to go in and, fix that. So now we're back to kind of one-to-one. And so now our time data should also be one-to-one. Yep, 107 distinct, 107 unique. And so now, right, we have something that looks much, much more like the template that we ended up wanting to fill out. And so this gets us from, right, something that is based on time slips to something that is aggregated in multiple dimensions, right? So it's aggregated based on the client, it's aggregated based on the area of law, it's aggregated based on, it pulls in that case information that we needed to. And this allows us to have this again all happening behind the scenes. And so if you had someone who is running this on a regular basis and they just need to run the same set of analyses over and over and over, they can just come in here, right, to our data, delete it, paste it back, hit refresh, and that's going to rerun all of that analysis for them. They're not going to have to delete all the columns, identify the ones they need to, do the aggregation, put in those formulas that they might need to. It's all done behind the scenes for them. And that can be really powerful. For this one, again, let me pull you to the live one that we have set up. We also, in addition to kind of creating that time summary, we also put it together a cleanup report. And so what this looks like, let me just take you back into kind of the final product here. Is in addition to kind of combining based on client IDs to get that aggregation and doing the time summary, we also did a kind of cleanup set. And so we said, okay, we want to look and see, we want to check for some common errors. And so in this grant, we wanted to say, okay, if there's not a soup district entered, and for us in Los Angeles County, we're divided up into supervisorial districts for the Board of Supervisors, which is what that is. If we don't have that, if it's blank, then put a flag there that says, hey, we're missing the soup district. If the number of soup districts per client, or if it's blank, if it's got no information, but it's not null, also missing. Or if the number of subdistricts is greater than one, then multiple subdistricts. And so for us, what that means is, again, after aggregating to the client level, we can say, okay, maybe one case is listed as being in a different district than the other one. And for this grant, we can only report in one district per client. So that's allowing us to flag that ahead of time, right? Without having to use complicated legal server reports, without having to add in tons of um, tons of Excel formulas and lookups. It's just all done in here. Um, Again, we have another one here that's saying, if the number of assessments is greater than the number of cases, then flag that and say maybe that's too many. If the assessments were, not done in the month that this is run, or for the month that this is looking at, then flag that as being missing, so we don't miss out on funds. Um, so you can see we've got a lot of kind of error checking built in here, and that we're able to do. And then again, because this one is actually pulling live from legal server, you can see that that source is coming in here. Again, we can go back to legal server, fix it, come back, hit refresh, and it's all back up to speed. So I'll stop there. Again, my apologies for kind of getting lost in the weeds a little bit with the list. It will happen to you, I promise. If you get into Power Query, you'll run into things that um, some things that make a lot of sense and are very kind of user friendly, and then there will be other things that you will end up in the depths of Stack Overflow trying to find an example for. But hopefully this has kind of given you at least a taste of what this can do, and kind of how it can be useful. It's not something I would use for every grant or every report, but when you do have these kind of templates that are looking at multiple kind of aggregations, multiple kind of lenses on your data, and you want to be able to do that behind the scenes and hand that off to folks, super powerful way to do that. At that point, I think, Mary, I'll open it up for discussion, questions. I'm also happy to kind of figure out what I was doing and fix it. But
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Susan. That was awesome. And as someone who works in Power Query a lot, it was absolutely a realistic depiction of a day in the life. Even if you know a lot about Power Query, as Susan does, it's just always how it goes. There's like an iterative process. So hopefully that makes it a little less kind of scary and intimidating. Like even the
yep,
pros need to go back to Google and kind of remind ourselves how to do things.
all the
See a
time.
couple comments in the chat. Yes, totally agree, Michelle. Um, yeah, Susan, I have a question that's kind of sort of not a Power Query question, but it
Yeah.
might link back. I saw that you use client ID last 6 digits in here a lot, which is awesome for protecting client privacy. It's an option in legal
Mhm.
server to identify clients based on a backend database ID, but it relies on really great case associations to kind of
Yeah.
have that be accurate. And I was sort of curious what kind of systems you have in place to make sure that's really, really great at counting clients and people
Yeah.
under associating the case association.
Yeah. So basically we may have to turn off my screen share for a second. Um I built a report in legal server that I'm happy to share the template for, which is doing some of the aggregation like I believe you guys might do, of kind of creating this custom client ID based on the year of birth, the kind of like first couple of letters of their first name, first couple of letters of their last name. And then I actually have that in legal server as something that I review periodically, and now Diana is going to have to review periodically, to see like, okay, how many client IDs, as marked in legal server, are associated with this kind of custom client ID that we've created based on the data that we pulled. And then if it looks like, oh, there's like 3 client IDs and they all have the same year of birth, month of birth, first 2 letters of their first name, first 3 letters of their last name, that's probably the same client. And so we do periodic cleanups to go in and associate those cases correctly. because it's never going to happen with the end users getting that 100% right. And so, but we found it kind of worth the trade-off to do that in legal server to be able to use the client ID versus just using that kind of custom identifier in all of our reports that we end up pulling from legal server. I can easily imagine making a different determination on that, but that's what worked for us.
Cool. Yeah. I do want to open up to other questions, but I'm curious, Susan, do you or kind of the data team end up doing that case association cleanup yourself, or do you communicate with the advocates on their cases or clients?
Yeah, it depends. So if it's just kind of it looks like there's a kind of a one-off issue of like, oh, like maybe this person had like one advocate forgot to associate, and then a bunch of new cases got associated with that new ID, and it's kind of a little bit of a mess. I'll just clean it up. Most of the time I just clean it up. But if I see patterns of like, okay, this particular advocate, none of their cases are associated or they're like regularly missing it, at that point I do kind of go back to the team and say, hey, here's why this is important. Here's what I'm noticing. Here's why it's important. Here's how to fix it. And that does help kind of, mitigate the issue moving forward. But as far as the actual cleanup, I'll typically do that. The thing that we will ask advocates to do is if things get wrongly associated, we train them on how to fix that, right? So sometimes we'll have, um, people get in bad habits, so they'll do a quick case copy for a family member rather than for that same exact client. And then they'll be like, why are these cases saying it's the same client? You told the system that, even though you didn't know you were doing that. Here's how to go in and kind of break that association. But yeah, that's what's worked for us. Again, I can imagine it working differently, but it does get a little bit in the weeds of, figuring out which client ID you want to associate which case with, and figuring out how to do that. So
Susan, actually have this situation going on now where someone, instead of creating a new, like the intake for a spouse the correct way, they're associated. So the spouse doesn't have a client file in the system. So when I
yeah.
went to try and disassociate it, there's no one to reassociate that case
Yeah.
to. So how do you fix that?
Yeah. So we can actually I actually have a test that I can show you on that one. So it's in for us, we put it in an action called edit client name. And so we've got the client name in here. And so, we can come in here. This is also where we would change it if someone has a legal name other than their kind of preferred name. And then it runs the kind of conflict check again. And it is not documented anywhere that I can find. But if you select this top radio button here, that will disassociate the client from anything that was previously associated with. So if it was previously associated with, like, again, like a spouse or a family member, this top radio button will break that, and then it will generate a new client ID for that person. So that's how you do it.
I'll have to try that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I want to move on from this, but the last note, I think, Susan, that was a really good point about how sometimes clicking the button breaks previous associations, because I think we've also seen sometimes when people don't realize it does that, if they're trying to associate a new case, you actually have to go back and re-add the other cases. So that's like a small but important kind of caveat there. Yes. I see Eric has a question in the chat. When you talked in the beginning about the API with Legal Server, did you say you were able to write back to Legal Server, or is it just data coming out?
So it's just data coming out to get into Power Query. We're using the reports API to do that. If you were wanting to write back into Legal Server, that would be, I don't think something you would do with Power Query or Excel. You could do it using, Power Apps potentially. You could do that using other tools. But at least for us, we're just doing the read only. And then when there's data that needs to be fixed, instead of fixing it in Excel, which had been the prior practice, we're sending folks back to legal server to fix it. which does a couple of things. One, it discourages the kind of finance and grants team from just doing it and kind of puts that onus back on the program team to really own their data. Secondly, it prevents us from reporting stuff that's out of sync with legal server, right? Again, if you're writing back to legal server, you wouldn't have that issue. But short of having that option, we would rather it be correct in the database and correct on the report than just correct on the report. And risk being, having to run an aggregate report down the road and not even remembering what happened. So again, for us, we just push all the changes through on the legal server side. And then again, because we're using that reports API, we can just hit refresh in Excel. It'll re-pull that information and we don't have to do kind of any, again, manual work, right? To kind of go back and add the formulas and add the pivot tables and add all the things we might otherwise need to do. Yeah. Yeah, we actually don't, at LAFLA, we have not yet invested in the kind of right back to legal server APIs. We like kind of being on the cutting edge of what we can do with the data that we have, but we also are a little bit more on the conservative side on building stuff that writes into it. Just because, we haven't had as robust a team to really monitor that. Yeah, if we're using the reports API, can you show how you connect that to Excel? I will very briefly, but I'll also point you to kind of where you can find that in more detail, because it's going to match exactly with what you would do in Power BI, which we've documented. And so I'll I think most folks have this link, but if not, we can put it in the chat. If you scroll down here, we've got this Power BI for legal aid document. And maybe this can be migrated over to LSN tabs page and made a little bit more official. But we've got the instructions kind of towards the end of this on how to actually connect to the reports API. And so there's some steps that you have to take in legal server to make sure that you have a reports API user, get the API link and key. And then it's going to be this kind of adding a web data source. In this case, it says the Power BI, but again, you would do the exact same thing in Power Query. So if I come over, see if I can get my Power Query to actually move for me. Doesn't want to go to my other window. Let's see if we can do this. Okay. So if I was to come in here, right, and then I hit get data from web, that's where I'm going to come in and put that information in from legal server. So I paste that reports API URL here, hit OK, do the authentication, and then that's going to pull that into Power Query. And when you do that, it's going to look something like this. And so I'm not going to show the exact link because I don't want to have to change the key. But you're going to be able to just kind of get the data. Typically, it'll expand it out for you. But again, this is all covered in that document. And so, it pulls in pretty well, especially if you pull it over as JSON. If you pull it over as XML, it's sometimes wonky. But again, we've got the steps in the document for how to make sure that comes over in the way you expect.
So Susan, as a follow-up to that, sorry.
Yeah.
Basically, if you're running a monthly report, actually, I'm thinking of a use case for a quarterly report. You're just basically opening the same Excel table and it's going to be up. You're just
Yep.
exporting or printing off or whatever the version of on the day that you send it. And that Excel spreadsheet's not going to keep that historic data if it's continually updating, right?
Yeah, so that's kind of built into the workflow that I set up for this. So basically what we've instructed the team to do, save a copy of the template, right, to work from, do whatever cleanup you need to do. And then this piece is going to actually disconnected, right? So in whatever copy that you want to save for historical purposes, you can come in here and you can say, I actually want to unlink this data from that external table or from that external connection. And so what that will do is it'll make sure that you have the copy that is for that month or for that quarter, that is no longer going to connect to legal server. It's not going to refresh. And that way, if someone did happen to come in here and, oh, this is the template, I'll just hit refresh and update it. They're not going to accidentally overwrite what you had done before. So these two steps here, kind of unlinking the table. So coming in here, going into table design, hitting unlink, that's going to disconnect this from legal server. And then this piece here is just going to break everything, which is what we want when we submit it to the funder. We don't want it to be connected to any of our live data. And so this is just getting this as a nice clean copy for them that's not connected to any of this other kind of infrastructure that we built around it. So again, like a few steps, but we found that Dianara, I don't know if I know you've had to run this a few times. It seems like it works pretty well.
Yeah, I haven't run into any issues so far. It's just a matter of making sure that the tokens are working properly and folks are completing the authorization or credentials, but otherwise, no issues on my end.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely have saved a copy of these templates, all of the ones that I've given to grants, just in case someone happens to, overwrite something and we want to get back to kind of the clean version. But yeah, again, not worth it for every grant, but when you have these kind of complicated ones, especially ones that might require more extensive cleanup or more kind of complicated mapping, like I can't say enough about how much time it saves. Anything else? I don't have the chat in front of me, so.
I think we've answered all the questions that I see in there at this point. Does anyone
Yeah,
else have any?
Just as a last note. So when we pull this kind of into the final version, more or less, that we have from Power Query. So right, this is our final version that I have from Power Query. The way that I ended up getting it into the template was by adding an index, right? So we still ended up using some Excel templates or Excel formulas rather to get the data from here over to here. So you'll see if you look at kind of the kind of field up here, this is saying there we go. Look up, right? It's using our XLOOKUP to say, get me the column C from this time summary based on the number in column A. And so that's how we're getting it, kind of that last step of the puzzle. We still do rely on the kind of more traditional Excel tools to pull that over. But again, it's nice and consistent because of all of the backend stuff in Power Query. So I just hit refresh, and then that's going to pull everything over, not just into the tables that we've created, but also into the exact template. Same thing here, right? We're saying, give me the minimum or the maximum of the values in the month of or the date of service that we're reporting for. So that automatically updates. So definitely not a replacement for your existing Excel skills, but a nice kind of power up for them.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Susan. That was amazing, just in terms of the specifics, but also just a reminder of Power Query and all that it can help you do with our complicated and weirdly formatted data. Thanks everyone for coming. Next month, August, we have like kind of our off month with just a general discussion, and then we'll be back in September with a presentation that is TBD. As always, if you're interested in maybe kind of just like have an idea of something you might like to present about, don't hesitate to reach out to me or to Shelley.